This happened to every man who has ever lived, every single one, across every culture, every continent, every era of human history. And for most of that history, roughly 200,000 years of it, there was no framework for understanding what it was, where it came from, or what it meant. Just the biological reality and the human need to make sense of it. Stay with me, because the story of how ancient men understood and responded to ejaculation is not the story most people would expect. It is a story about the origins of medicine, the birth of cosmology, the first theories of human consciousness, and one of the most persistent misunderstandings in the history of science. Let's start with what ancient men actually thought was happening, because the answer is not obvious, and the assumptions they made, reasonable from their perspective, completely wrong from ours, shaped medicine, philosophy, and religion for thousands of years. The most widespread ancient theory of semen was that it was not produced by the body in the way we now understand. It was believed, across cultures that had no contact with each other, to be a refined or distilled form of blood, or of life force itself. The logic was internally coherent. You lose blood, and you become weaker. You lose large amounts of blood, and you can die. Semen was precious, limited, and its production appeared to cost the body something. The connection seemed obvious. Aristotle, who was wrong about many things, and right about surprisingly many others, proposed that semen was produced from blood through a process of heating and refinement. The male body, in his view, was hotter than the female body. This extra heat converted blood into semen. Women, being cooler, could not make this conversion, which was his explanation for why women did not ejaculate in the same way. This theory was not fringe speculation. It was mainstream medical thinking that persisted in various forms for nearly 2,000 years. In ancient China, semen was understood as a manifestation of Jing, a vital essence believed to be finite and precious. A man was born with a limited supply. Ejaculation depleted it. The depletion could not be fully reversed. Conserving Jing was therefore a matter not just of health, but of longevity and spiritual development. Taoist sexual practices developed elaborate techniques, some documented in texts dating back over 2,000 years, specifically designed to allow men to experience orgasm without ejaculation. The goal was not pleasure management, it was the conservation of a vital resource believed to be irreplaceable. In ancient India, similar theories developed independently. The concept of ojas, a refined vital substance produced from food through a long chain of biological conversions, placed semen at the end of that chain as the most concentrated and precious substance the body could produce. Losing it unnecessarily was considered a form of biological waste that weakened not just the body, but the mind. These were not primitive superstitions. They were systematic attempts to make sense of a biological phenomenon using the observational tools available, and the core observation that men feel a distinct physiological change after ejaculation, that something has left the body, that recovery takes time, is accurate. The interpretation was wrong. The observation was real. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Ancient cultures that had no contact with each other independently arrived at remarkably similar frameworks for managing ejaculation, not just the theory, but the practice. Ritual abstinence before significant events appears across cultures on every continent. Before hunting, before battle, before religious ceremony, before athletic competition. The ancient Greeks believed that athletes who abstained from sex, and particularly from ejaculation, performed better. This was not random folk wisdom. It was systematic enough that it was incorporated into athletic training protocols documented by ancient writers. Hunters in multiple documented traditions practiced abstinence before hunts, not as religious observance primarily, but as practical preparation believed to sharpen focus, strength, and endurance. Warriors in numerous cultures had formalized rules about abstinence before combat. Is there any biological reality behind these practices? The evidence is genuinely mixed. Testosterone levels do show small measurable increases after brief periods of abstinence. Whether this translates to performance differences meaningful enough to matter in hunting or combat is disputed, but the observation that something changes, that men feel different, more focused, more energized after abstinence, is reported consistently enough across cultures and time periods to suggest it reflects something real in human male physiology. Ancient men were not making things up. They were observing themselves carefully and drawing conclusions that were often wrong in their mechanism, but sometimes right in their effects. And then there is the reproductive piece, which is where the story becomes most surprising. Ancient humans did not know that ejaculation was necessary for reproduction. They knew sex was connected to pregnancy. They knew the timing roughly corresponded, but the specific mechanism, that sperm fertilized eggs, that ejaculation deposited sperm, that conception conception required the union of a male and female cell was completely unknown. For most of human history, the connection between ejaculation and pregnancy was understood in fundamentally different ways. Some cultures believed the male seed planted the child and the female body simply nourished it, like soil receiving a seed. The child was essentially the man's creation, housed temporarily in the woman. Other cultures believed the opposite, that women generated new life from their own bodies, and male fluids merely activated or strengthened the process. Some cultures had no clear theory connecting sex specifically to pregnancy at all. The connection between a specific act months before and a birth was not always obvious, particularly in societies where sex was frequent and the interval between act and consequence was long. The discovery that sperm cells existed and that they were the specific component of semen responsible for fertilization happened in 1677. Antony van Leeuwenhoek looked through a microscope and saw them for the first time. For the entire 200,000 years before that moment, every theory about ejaculation and reproduction was built on observation without the most fundamental piece of biological information. And yet, working only from what they could observe, ancient men developed frameworks for understanding their own biology that were sophisticated, internally consistent, and in some cases, practically effective. They got the mechanism wrong almost universally, but they were paying careful attention to something real. Every elaborate theory, every ritual practice, every system of conservation and management, all of it built on the careful observation of their own bodies in the absence of the tools needed to understand what they were actually seeing. That gap between accurate observation and accurate explanation is the story of most of human intellectual history, and it started, like so many things, with humans trying to understand something that happened to them every day. If you want to know, you know what to do.